I feel like it's been a while since I've done any Space Marine lore videos, so today I thought it would be a good idea to do a deep dive on what a Space Marine creation looks like. I'm not talking about the individual battle brother, but rather the chapter. So in other words, what is the recruitment process, the homeworld, the creation of the actual chapter itself. Now, it's always silly to me to try to break down what a Space Marine is. After all, the Space Marine is the poster boy of Games Workshop. It is the icon of Warhammer 40k, so if you're listening to this video, odds are you already have some background as to what a Space Marine is. But just in case if you don't, let's get a brief introduction of how the Space Marines came to be. These are the superhuman warriors of humanity that the Emperor used to conquer the galaxy during the Great Crusade. They are genetically enhanced warriors. They are physically stronger, far more resilient, and mentally superior to most normal human beings. In the presence of a Space Marine, also referred to as an Astarte, most people feel a combination of awe and fear. They are basically demigods or angels of the God Emperor made flesh. Now, these Angels of Death are divided into chapters, usually about 1,000 Space Marine or 1,000 Battle Brothers strong. These individual chapters are created during what is known as a founding. So it's not just that the Imperium needs a Space Marine chapter to defend a certain world. There is an entire process on the creation of Space Marines, and they are created in giant batches known as foundings. The process by which a new founding's creation is approved by the Imperial government is mysterious and arcane, subject to decades or even centuries of planning before it is announced. It is only by the edict of the High Lords of Terra that such an undertaking as the creation of new chapters can be instigated, for it requires the cooperation and mobilization of countless divisions within the Imperium's monolithic and vast governmental organizations. Establishing new Astarte chapters on an individual basis is nigh impossible. The mobilization of such vast resources is beyond the ability of any single segment of the Imperium. The Adeptus Mechanicus plays an essential role in the process of the founding, for its highest echelons are tasked with creating, testing, and developing the gene seed samples that will provide the genetic foundation of this new chapter. Entire Forge Worlds may be turned over to the manufacture of the mighty arsenal of weaponry and ammunition, power armor, vehicles, and starships that any such force will require. There are a myriad of other concerns as well. A suitable homeworld inhabited by humans must be identified for the new chapter, which it will likely provide not only as a secure and defensible base of operations, but also a source of new recruits as well. Such worlds might have been reported by rogue traders and earmarked centuries before by the Adeptus Mechanicus explorators as potential Astarte homeworlds. A degree of environmental terraforming might be required, and the natives of the world, if they are to become the source of the new chapter's aspirants, must be studied and tested by the Mechanicus Magos biologists and genitors for many generations to ensure that they are genetically pure and free of any strain of mutation that might later affect the chapter itself. Now let's dive even deeper into what a Space Marine homeworld is going to look like. A Space Marine chapter homeworld, sometimes referred to in Imperial records as the main chapter planet, is an Imperial classification for a world that serves as the base of operation for a Space Marine chapter's fortress monastery. Most often, but not always, these chapter homeworlds are recruitment worlds for the Astarte chapter. Not all Astarte chapter homeworlds are planets, but rather orbiting voidcraft, space stations, desert moons, or asteroids. In every case, however, the chapter homeworld is under the complete and total control of the chapter, thus making the chapter master the de facto planetary governor and the imperial commander of the entire world. While most chapters take little part in the political and economic affairs of the population of their homeworld, some involve themselves in varying degrees. These arrangements can be summarized as a direct rule, stewardship, or a distant rule. A direct rule is when the chapter rules over its homeworld and people directly, and its leaders are regarded by them as figures of ultimate authority. It is comparatively rare for a chapter to involve itself in a particular consideration of administering its homeworld, and even when it does so, the more prosaic details are often left to chapter serfs, or leaders chosen by various means from the population. The advantage of direct rule is that the chapter can enforce every element of its will upon its subjects, shaping their development to better produce promising aspirants. In times of outright war, the Space Marines may take direct control of the world's military, sometimes even dispatching its officers to serve as generals amongst the lesser armies. When a Space Marine chapter homeworld is ruled over in a stewardship, the chapter gives over the administration of its subjects to a ruling class drawn from the population, issuing broad directives but maintaining their distance. The Space Marines are regarded as figureheads and may even attend traditional events and services, such as the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension or its local equivalent. Generally, however, the people hold the Space Marines in awe, even if they rarely see them, and every family aspires to have one of its sons being selected to serve in their ranks. Should the homeworld face invasion, the Space Marines may revert to direct rule for the duration of the emergency, or at least have the power to issue grand strategy to the world's indigenous armies. The most common type of relationship a chapter has with its homeworld is that of a distant rule. In practice, they take no hand in the affairs of their subjects. If the population is even aware of the existence of the Space Marines, they are distant, semi-mythological figures whose appearance is a sign of great things. In the event of an enemy threatening the world, the Space Marines are likely to assume the burden of its defense, but are less likely to interact with the population at all. The location of the chapter's fortress monastery dictates on what type of relationship will be developed with their homeworld. For instance, if it's a fleet-based chapter and they make their homes on vast space-going vessels, often unique artifacts predating the age of the Imperium, or in the cases of the Dark Angel's Fortress Monastery, the Rock, it's a vast chunk of planetary debris hollowed out and fitted with very large warp drives. Many of these chapters travel the galaxy in vast circuits, taking Terran centuries to pass through a single segmentum, while others limit their movement to ancient, hereditary spheres of influence and areas of responsibility. Fleet-based chapters recruit from a wide range of planets. Sometimes they hold the exclusive rights to recruit at a particular world, although the population of these worlds may know nothing of such an arrangement. Others make points of seeking out new societies to recruit from, ever vigilant of a promising recruitment world. Should an exceptional source be discovered, some chapters establish small facilities in order to watch over the population and test the aspirants. Upon discovering of a singular, valuable recruiting source, some fleet-based chapters may even abandon their nomadic existence, claiming the world and establishing a fortress monastery on the planet. Because they tend to recruit from a variety of sources, fleet-based chapters are more unlikely than any other chapter to be a direct rule or stewardship over their planet. The most common type of Space Marine chapter homeworld is a feral world. These are planets colonized eons ago, long before the age of the Imperium, and then they subsequently regress to a barbaric state due to extended periods of isolation or other less predictable factors. In a galaxy-spanning empire that harnesses the power of technology, the spear and the axe remain perhaps the most common weapon, for the masses of worlds fall into this category, perhaps even more than any other type. With resources focused on key strategic worlds, there is no reason to spare the effort to civilize these natives on these numerous feral worlds. In many cases, doing so would deprive the Imperium of a truly invaluable asset, for feral worlders are by definition amongst the toughest and most accomplished it is to possible recruits. As a result, many Space Marine chapters make their homes on such worlds, close to the source of their recruits. A Space Marine chapter based on a feral world is likely to maintain a distance from its populace, with its fortress monastery located in a distant and inaccessible island or high atop a mountain range. In most cases, the savagery of the tribes from which the chapter recruits is tempered by the training, indoctrination, and psycho-conditioning imposed to its neophytes, but in some cases, the chapter is very much shaped by the character of the population, inheriting not only its warlike qualities, but many of its unique cultural mores. Similar to feral worlds, and just as popular, are death worlds. These are planets so dangerous to life that unless they harbor some essential resource, mankind would have no reason to set foot on these planets. Though no single terrain type defines this class of world, many are swathed in jungles populated by carnivorous plants as dangerous as any predator beast, where even the air itself is poison. Most death worlds are impossible to settle, for every single living thing in them appears motivated to expel any intruders, as if ruled over by an overarching and utterly malicious intelligence. A tiny proportion have been settled, but life there is a daily, even hourly struggle for survival, where one false step spells death at the slavery maul of some hideous deathworld predator. The sort of cultures that spawn people able to reach maturity in such a place are amongst the most valuable recruiting grounds for the Space Marines, for the mere fact of surviving to adolescence marks an aspirant as amongst the toughest humanity is capable of producing. Most chapters that call a death world their home are likely to be experts in fighting in a particular type of terrain. To do so, it is not simply a matter of making the best use of the environment, but of surviving the very worst that the environment can throw at the battle brothers, and even turning it against the foe. In occupying a death world, a chapter will be forced to defend itself constantly against the world itself, a fact that tests the battle brothers continuously, even when they are not fighting the enemies of the Imperium. While some locate their fortress monasteries in orbit, others prefer to reside amidst the very worst of the death world's environment, honing their skills even beyond those of the already legendary abilities of the Adeptus Astartes. A less common type of Space Marine chapter homeworld is a feudal world. These are the planets where the population has either risen above the crude tribal structures of a pharaoh world, or regressed from a more advanced level. In either case, it is likely to be external causes that have brought such a change about, whether deliberate or not. The population of a feudal world is organized into relatively stable nation-states, with complex webs of vassal obligations linking extended groupings. Technologically, most of the inhabitants are ignorant of advanced machinery, but may utilize basic firearms manufactured locally. In all likelihood, all but the world's ruling classes are aware of the Imperium at large. The majority of the population still holds ancient superstitions and are but one step away from barbarous savagery. Many of these worlds are ruled over with an iron fist by a warrior aristocracy that engages in ceaseless and brutal wars, often against its own people. Among such classes, the warrior code is all, and even the smallest slight against the warrior's honor is answered with a challenge, often to the death. Space Marine chapters utilizing feudal worlds as their base may keep their distance from the populace, as they do on pharaoh worlds, or they may establish themselves as distant overlords, high kings, or secret warrior orders. A chapter monastery on such a world is likely to be regarded by the populace as the most impenetrable keep, where great heroes reside, and the subject of vast bodies of myth and legends. The least common type of Space Marine chapter homeworld is categorized as the civilized world. Civilized worlds describe a wide range of societies and technological levels, but in general, such worlds will be a functioning part of a larger imperial sector, with trade links to nearby worlds. Contact with other planets and people is relatively common, at least amongst the upper echelons of society, and the people see themselves as subjects of the greater Imperium. The populations of such worlds enjoy a reasonable standard of living, but that very fact makes them less suitable as a recruitment source for the Adeptus Astartes than many other types. In a society where an infant is more or less guaranteed to reach maturity without becoming the prey to some ravenous predator beast or being enslaved by a rival tribe, the survival instinct is comparatively low and unlikely to produce suitable raw materials for the Space Marines. Only the most exceptional of the civilized worlds ever provide recruits for the Adeptus Astartes, and these are generally societies with a strong warrior code imbued by hundreds of generations of service, perhaps rigorously enforced by a ruling military elite. The Ultramarines' realm of Ultramar is such a region of the galaxy, where despite a reasonable standard of living, every family dreams of having a son accepted into the ranks of the Ultramarines, and ensures that they are being trained to the utmost degree as soon as they are able to walk. It is only those civilized worlds that maintain the most rigorous military traditions that are likely to appeal to the Adeptus Astartes as a source of aspirants. On some of these worlds, the Space Marine chapter forms the very highest tier of the stratified and regimental society, entirely focused on martial pursuits, where all aspire to the examples set by the Adeptus Astartes. In most cases, a chapter calling such a planet a homeworld maintains a distance from its subjects, while in some,
The chapter's Astartes and civilian staff are fully integrated into the wider system of traditions, obligations, and services. And finally, there are plenty of chapters that prefer to maintain their secrecy and isolate themselves from nearby populations. Fortunately, there is no shortage of barren or otherwise uninhabited worlds for such chapters to utilize as bases of operation. The fact that even an apparently desolate, airless rock might harbor one of the greatest military forces in humanity's arsenal is deterrent enough for many would-be invaders. And who knows how many outcasts have stumbled across a fully operational fortress monastery while exploring some isolated world, and never lived long enough to tell the tale. Chapters utilizing isolated, unpopulated planets as their homeworlds have to look further for sources of recruitment, but they are rarely far from worlds where they are entitled to recruit upon. Such chapters may recruit from a variety of nearby planets, drawing their recruits from feral world tribes, hive world gangs, and many other sources. Mixing several sources in a single intake of neophytes provides its own set of challenges, but ultimately produces a wide range of skills and qualities that serve the chapter well wherever it serves. While a Space Marine chapter's homeworld is their charge, several Space Marine chapters guilty of crimes against the Emperor but still deemed reliable by the Inquisition and the High Lords of Terra, such as the Mantis Warriors and Executioners, have been forced to forfeit their homeworlds, which requires them to become fleet-based chapters.
So as you could see, the homeworld of a Space Marine chapter is very, very important, but just as equally important to the creation of a battle brother is the recruitment process that a individual neophyte or an acolyte goes through in order to become a Space Marine.
The creation of Space Marines is a sacred task passed down by the Emperor of Mankind to his Adeptus Astartes warriors. Space Marines are not born, but forged, and while the Emperor made sure his superhuman warriors came from human stock, these angels of death were barely human at all, having been made superior in all respects to a normal man by a harsh regime of genetic modification, psycho-conditioning, and rigorous training. A transformation process that almost always starts at a very young age for these future warriors. At this point, each chapter of Space Marines has its own method of recruiting young warriors to fill its ranks. Many are based on a single world and recruit solely from that populace, setting trials and tests for prospective candidates to weed out all but the strongest and the most faithful. These worlds are often technologically backward, with strong militaristic societies, where male children who show potential are pushed harder and harder, that they may one day have a chance to join the ranks of the Space Marines, who are often known to such people as Star Warriors, Sky Knights, or similar names. Because feral worlds are rough, primitive, and untamed, their inhabitants invariably provide excellent recruits. But for true aggression and psychotic killers, few recruits can best the murderous city scum that roam the darkest pits of the Imperium's many hive worlds. Driven to extremes of violence by the pressures of hive world living, these merciless killers are usually ignored by the authorities. They make ideal Space Marine recruits, and whole gangs of city scum are sometimes hunted down and made to undergo the trials. Some recruits are drawn from more civilized worlds of the Imperium, but not very many. Whatever planet is used by the Space Marines as a recruiting world is observed closely by the chapter's apothecaries and chaplains. The population's genetic purity must be maintained in order to conserve those qualities that serve the Space Marine's purpose best. Their spiritual health is also maintained to ensure that no trace of the influence of the ruinous powers becomes manifest. Such observations are in general carried out from a distance, and it is rare for a society to have any direct contact with or knowledge of the Space Marines, or in many cases, even the Imperium. The chapter's officers might visit the culture once in a generation, and will be the subject of myth and legend. These mighty warriors from beyond the stars are figures of awe, and their word is law. The nature of the trials set by the outsiders vary enormously, but are so arduous that only a handful pass them. Those who fail may be lucky to even survive, for many trials have a form of ritual combat, the hunting of a great beast, or the performance of an incredibly dangerous feat of strength and bravery. At the conclusion of the trials, those few aspirants that have been deemed worthy are taken away, invariably never to be seen from again. Each chapter has its own traditions regarding this initiation of the recruits into their legends and secrets. This process often runs parallel to the biogenetic treatment the neophyte must undergo. As the physical transformation proceeds, spiritual change also occurs. Both are tempered by ongoing experiences on the field of battle and the rituals in which the neophyte must participate. The nature of such rites varies enormously from one chapter to the next. Some are solemn affairs recalling the sacrifice the Emperor made for humanity. Others are celebrations drawing on the culture and nature of the chapter's homeworld. Still more are bloody and barbaric, involving ritual bloodletting, scarification, or amputation. All are vital to the arcane workings of the chapter, and his participation is a prerequisite of the neophyte's acceptance by his would-be battle brothers. Such are the rigors of the training that many do not survive. Whether he is crippled upon the field of battle or found spiritually wanting during a particularly exhausting ritual, a neophyte may find himself cast out, his future with the chapter curtailed. In some instances, the neophyte may transgress one of the many articles of the chapter's law. An injury at war may prove preferable to the punishment. Many possible fates await those who fall by the wayside in this manner. Most are mind-scrubbed and become chapter serfs, manservants, and menials. The less fortunate are transformed into living cybernetic servitors, mindless biomechanical automatons who exist only to assist the chapter's tech marines in the operations of heavy and frequently dangerous machinery. A very rare few may yet rise to the position of relative power within the chapter's feudal household. Yet even the highest rank Factorum is only a lowly, nameless servant in the eyes of a full battle brother. While the recruit will undergo continuous testing throughout his time as a neophyte, and often well beyond after he becomes an initiate or a scout marine, the first trial the aspirant must pass to be accepted as a potential Astarte is by far the most significant of his young life. The events he experiences during the trial will live on in his mind and heart for the rest of his potentially long life. Every chapter of the Adeptus Astarte uses some form of trial to ascertain whether aspirants are worthy of beginning the often fatal process of becoming full-fledged battle brothers. The nature of this trial varies greatly from chapter to chapter and world to world. In some cases, a culture's traditional festivals and rites of passages are in fact well-disguised trials, established generations before and watched over in secret by the chaplains or senior chapter serfs. In such cases, the aspirants believe they are participating in a tribal ritual and coming-of-age challenges, and are entirely unaware that the most promising of their numbers will be selected to become Space Marines. In other cultures, the aspirants fight for the honor to be judged worthy, knowing a great reward awaits the victor. One of the most common aspirant trials takes the form of a duel between aspirants, often to the death. This type of duel varies enormously, and every culture from which the Astartes recruit has its own well-established practices. On different worlds, different weapons will be used, or sometimes none at all, as the combatants are expected to pummel and gouge one another bloody. Feral world tribes might use flint-tipped spears or the sharp and serrated fangs of wild beasts. Feudal worlds with a medieval level of technology might use highly ritualized forms of swordplay, while the most advanced imperial worlds will have access to a full gamut of lethal weaponry. Commonly, these trials are known as blood duels, and they are fought in rounds, with aspirants facing foe after foe until only a small number remain. If the chapter conducting the trial has need of a large number of recruits, the trial may be ended when a set number of aspirants are left. When the chapter has less need for new neophytes, the trial may continue until only a single battered and bloody challenger remains, the corpse of his enemies carpeting the ground before him. Not all duels are to the death, and some have highly ritualistic and specific victory conditions. Sometimes the duel is fought to first blood, or other times to the very point of death. The Space Marine apothecary is capable of rebuilding a crippled body should the aspirant be deemed worthy of acceptance, so most blood duels are brutal affairs. Many of the cultures from which the Astartes recruit exist in hellish, dangerous environments, populated by all manner of predatory beings. In most cases, the predators in question are beasts native to the world, but sometimes they have been deliberately introduced in order to make sure the cultures don't develop, ensuring that their every moment is a fight for survival and cultivating the most promising recruits possible. In many cases, the predators are human, such as the Geltstalkers, that prey on the outcasts of hive societies, culling the unwanted for monetary reward. Frontier worlds are often plagued by alien raiders ranging from the dreaded and lethal Dark Eldar to the barbarous greenskin orcs. This trial requires the aspirant to track down and slay or sometimes capture such a predator, turning the tables on those who prey upon his people and proving his worthiness to become an Astartes neophyte. The hunt is a test of cunning and determination, as much as raw martial prowess, often requiring the aspirant to track his prey in his own territory. The hunt may last days, weeks, or even longer, according to the conditions of the trial and the weapons the aspirant can either find or fashion for himself. Taking the target alive is perhaps the hardest of the trials, for the aspirants must keep the foe restrained on a return journey that might even prove to be more deadly and arduous as a hunt itself. A variation of the hunt requires a number of aspirants to hunt a single target, though only one may claim victory. Some of these aspirants strike out on their own, even turning on their fellows when the opportunity arises. Others set aside their rivalry and work together until the end. Those aspirants who survive must eventually fight one another for the honor of claiming victory. Whatever path the aspirant takes, the chapter learns much about their potential recruits. At the conclusion of the trial in which a prisoner is taken, it is common for the aspirant to be required to slay his captive, often before his people in a highly ritualized deed akin to a ceremonial sacrifice. Thus the blood offering is made, and the victor led away to join the ranks of the Sky Warriors. Few worlds of the Imperium are free from adversity, and these rare exceptions are either the holdings of wealthy mercantile combines or pleasure retreats for the retired, high-level Imperial servants or local sector nobility, entirely inaccessible to the vast bulk of mankind. Most of the Emperor's subjects live on worlds that are dangerous in some manner. Long-settled planets are riven by population and toxic wastes of thousands of years of industry seeping into the very bedrock and raining from the skies as a constant downpour. Other worlds are heavily irradiated by the process of industry or by the effects of local celestial phenomena. Younger worlds, where mankind's dominion is not yet fully established, are often host to all manner of hostile life forms, including predatory beasts, carnivorous plants, and virulent microbes. Plenty of worlds feature environments that are inimical to life, yet due to some natural resource or the world's strategic value, humans eke out an existence there nonetheless. Such environments range from sub-zero ice wastes, impenetrable swamps, and arid deserts to exotic deathworld jungles, methane sumps, and hydrocarbon oceans. In exposure trials, the aspirant must go out into such environments and simply survive for a set period of time. If he is a native of such a hellish place, the aspirant will have some knowledge of how to survive, yet is shorn of all aid and given only the most basic of survival equipment. Communities living in the midst of a deathworld jungle rely on total and constant cooperation just to go on existing another day, and none are ever out of sight of one another. An exposure trial in such a place would force the aspirant to go out into the jungle alone and face the terrors of the wild, with only himself to rely upon for the first time in his life. Some exposure trials test the aspirant's fortitude in a specific environment. Such trials carried out in an icy waste could involve the aspirant traveling from one point to another, with countless hundreds of kilometers of trackless, snow-blasted plains separating the two. Other aspirants might have to cross an entire continent of irradiated ash dunes, traverse an impassable mountain range, swim a predatory-infested ocean, or 100 other such challenges. One particularly inventive variation of the exposure trial is one in which the aspirant is taken from his own environment and transplanted into an entirely unfamiliar one. A feral world savage might be deposited into a hive city, or a hive worlder in a predatory-infested deathworld jungle. Many exposure trials are impossible to complete, entailing the aspirant simply to stay alive as long as possible. Those who face the impossible without faltering, and who survive long past the point they should, and then perish, are recovered by the chapter's apothecaries, often having succumbed but not yet died, oftentimes revived, having been judged worthy of becoming an Astartes neophyte. The truth is that no world is untouched by bloodshed and death, and for many human societies, war is a permanent state of existence. Many of the worlds from which Space Marine chapters recruit are not home to a single unified society, but rather a host of small tribes constantly at war with one another. In such societies, trials are all but unnecessary, and instead of staging formal tests and challenges, the Space Marines simply watch these wars from afar, witness the deeds of the greatest heroes, and select the victors as aspirants. Hive worlds often fall into this category, especially the lawless underhives and the polluted ash waste between the hive cities. Gangs of savage psychopaths battle one another ceaselessly for power and influence, and the greatest of these gang leaders sometimes attract the attentions of the servants of the chapter. In most cases, all a Space Marine needs to do is watch the war unfold, but in some instances, they actively take a hand in creating conflict and strife. By limiting the technological level of a society, curtailing its access to natural resources, infiltrating it with chapter serfs who spread hate, lies, and paranoia, and occasionally even introduce psychosis-inducing substances into the food chain, the Astartes can ensure there is no break in the constant state of warfare that produces the chapter's next heroes. The horrors that a Space Marine will witness during his service to the Emperor are sufficient to destroy a normal man's sanity. Many chapters consider the aspirant's spiritual and mental capabilities every bit as important as his physical characteristics, and impose trials not of the body but of the mind. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of ways in which a chapter can test the aspirant's inner strength. One method is a vision, imposed by a psychic intrusion by one of the chapter's librarians. The aspirant might be plunged into a trance-like state, during which he is subjected to all manner of horrific visions or irresistible temptations. He faces creatures dragged up from his own nightmares, and phantoms seated in his mind by the librarian, who preside over the trial and judge the aspirant's very soul. Some trials are far cruder, and the aspirant is simply administered some powerful psychotic concoction, often distilled from the venom of local predators or the sap of a rare plant. Under the influence of such a drug, the aspirant must face the very worst his own psyche can produce, terrors often far worse than the librarian can implant. Many die under the sheer stress and trauma placed on his heart during the process, and those that survive will be utterly changed physically and mentally. Another common variation of this trial is exposure to pain. There are many different ways in which pain can be applied, some primitive, others fiendishly inventive. Some torments leave the aspirant scarred for life, though the scars are proudly worn as evidence of his mental strength and his passing of the knowledge of self-trial. A trial used by a small number of chapters is known as the challenge trial. The challenge requires the aspirant to fight a duel or compete in some other manner against a full Astarte. In truth, his success is more often measured in the degree of his failure. Very occasionally, an aspirant does manage to beat an Astarte, and when this happens, it is not uncommon for the individual to go on to become a legendary hero of the chapter. Many challenge trials involve a test of martial skills, with the aspirant fighting an armed duel against a battle brother. It is usual for the aspirant to be armed and the Astarte to fight with his bare hands, and probably without his power armor. Yet still the aspirant has virtually no hope of victory. Most challenge duels end in death of the aspirant, for even an unarmed, unarmored Astarte is a giant compared to a young, adolescent challenger, and well able to slay him with a single blow, intentionally or not. Other challenge trials involve contests of strength, stamina, speed, skill, or mental strength. The trial might range from lifting impossibly heavy loads to the consuming of toxic substances. As with a duel, this type of challenge trial can often prove deadly. In both cases, however, an aspirant has failed the trial, yet performed to the chapter's satisfaction. He is then resurrected from the jaws of death by the chapter's apothecaries, and judged worthy of progressing to the rank of neophyte.
Now, once a battle brother is created, one of the most important aspects of the chapter is its transportation. In other words, its battle barges. How a Space Marine chapter sends out its battle brothers into warfare. Because when we see them on the tabletop, they are always fighting within some type of land.
Despite their affinity for ground assaults and their desire to meet the enemy eye to eye, the Space Marines are often attacked by cowards that prefer to wage naval battles in space. For these foolhardy foes, assaulting the main spaceships of the Space Marines, known as battle barges, seems to be more of a winnable encounter than meeting the Angels of Death in hand-to-hand combat, or across a withering barrage of bolter fire. But this couldn't be further from the truth. A Space Marine battle barge, while not as fast or maneuverable as the light cruisers of the Imperial Navy, or as well equipped for long-range naval fights, is still a dangerous ship to pick a fight with. The most valuable asset, and what makes a battle barge so devastating, is its cargo. Hundreds of battle-hardened Space Marines stand ready to perform boarding actions and gut out the enemy ship from the inside out. First, let's understand that no two Space Marine battle barges are the same. The Ironclad, Legate, and Warspite are only a few variants, and while many share similarities as their design comes from the ancient templates of the Great Crusade era, every Space Marine chapter obtained their battle barge during different points in Imperial history, and so were built with slightly different accommodations. However, these ships have one goal above all else: planetary assault. When the Emperor of Mankind marched into the galaxy, ready to unify the scattered human empires, he commanded the tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus to build him the vessels that would transport his Space Marine legions into battle. As such, the Martian priesthood went about refitting battleships to fit the Emperor's standard. They modified the hulls of these ships to provide ample room for the Astarte legions and their armories. Knowing that these battle barges would be part of a grander expeditionary fleet, which meant that there would be a variety of spaceships that could fulfill the roles that the battle barges lacked, the design removed anything that prevented the ship from accommodating as many launch bays, muster decks, and transport holds. They were created to house not only multiple chambers for the legionnaires, their servants, and slaves, but also possess large areas for training during longer voyages. Battle barges were meant to be large enough to fit gunship squadrons, intra-system craft arrays, dozens of drop pods, and living quarters, but also formidable enough to endure heavy fire and the perils of transit through the warp. The clever Magos architects and the master artificers who built the first battle barges knew full well that these vessels would suffer from terrible storms of violence, and in order to deliver its payload of Space Marines and attack craft, a battle barge needed to enter the planet's orbit without crashing and burning from the attacks of nearby ships and ground-based orbital defenses. The Martian tech priest understood that depending on the atmospheric and gravitational conditions, successful deployment may require the battle barge to enter a synchronous or low-orbit hold, making it even more vulnerable to attack. To compound the problem, the sheer size of the vessel made it an easy target, and its low engine power-to-mass ratio made it unable to execute dynamic evasive maneuvers. A strong shield or armor had to be designed for each battle barge. Even when deployment was complete, a battle barge was expected to remain defiant in orbit, an immovable object acting as a guardian over the Space Marine units below. In short, a battle barge had to absorb more fire and weather more damage in a single mission than most warships are capable of withstanding over the course of their service. The master artificers of the Adeptus Mechanicus answered this threat by constructing a virtually indestructible ship. The battle barge's skeletons were forged from ultra-dense alloy. These rare-based minerals could only be mined from the sites of recent volcanic eruptions, and were further hardened by the compression tanks situated on high-gravity moons. The pressurized environment hardened the alloy, ensuring the superstructure was as solid as the doors protecting the Emperor's throne room itself. These inner frameworks were then girded in kilometers of hardened plasteel and adamantium, and edged with thick ferrocrete buttresses that surrounded the main hull like a reinforced rib cage. Finally, a second and albalite layer of armor was added to each vessel's prow, forging an impenetrable figurehead. To further protect the battle barge's inner hulls, a sophisticated set of void shields were designed to layer across the outside of the ship. Wavering bands of energy that sparked around the vessel created a protective teardrop of visible force. These energy barriers were capable of absorbing or deflecting the worst of the stellar radiation and meteor showers, and could sustain a succession of weapon hits and explosive impacts before overloading. Because the Adeptus Mechanicus understood that once overloaded, the shield generator would have to be power cycled in order to allow the generator to vent off the excess energy, a process that not only would take a lot of time, but result in terrible slave and chapter serf casualties. The architects of these void shields segmented the entire energy field throughout the ship. In this way, it is possible for an area of a ship to fail without leaving the ship entirely exposed. Energy could be siphoned from one zone to another and redirected to where it was needed most. In dire situations, the shield's energy could be driven up past its normal maximum. This would temporarily provide the battle barge with great protection, but would soon burn out the generators and render the shields inert. Faced with overwhelming odds, some bold Space Marine captains would energize the entire battle barge and use the entire ship as a battering ram against other ships. This tactic would prove very effective, but would cause severe damage that often could not be repaired. The primary weapon of any battle barge was its dorsal-mounted bombardment cannons. Each cannon comprised a series of heavy-weighted batteries, huge turret-mounted linear accelerators that launched a salvo of heavy magma bomb warheads. As the name suggests, bombardment cannons were primarily deployed to bombard planets from high orbit, a task at which it excelled. A battle barge will begin firing as soon as it reaches orbit, and will continue to rain destruction down on a planet even as its complement of Space Marines is hurled down in their assault craft, clearing a path for their deployment on the ground. Capable of obliterating almost any manner of planetary defenses, bombardment cannons will first be directed against a missile silo and laser towers, ensuring that the Space Marine attack force can proceed unmolested, before being used to take command bunkers and shield generators, aiding their swift domination of the planet. On more than one occasion, a single salvo fired in a dense populated center has ended the conflict before gathering any real momentum, shocking a world's leader into seeing the error of their ways and quickly swearing fealty to the Emperor once more. After the Horus Heresy, when the Space Marine legions were split apart by the Codex Astartes, the battle barge saw some minor modifications. Each Space Marine chapter was given anywhere between 2 to 4 battle barges, as each one could accommodate 3 full companies. The only exception to this were the Crusading chapters, that often had a larger battle barge variant or would have to fit the typical chambers that a chapter would have in a fortress monastery onto multiple battle barges. This included a Great Hall, which is a massive chamber often found at the core of the battle barge. It's lined with statues of heroes of the chapter, and its walls were painted with frescoes that would show bloody battles and scenes of ancient heroism. In the center of the chamber, the chapter's symbol would often dominate the floor, easily 100 meters across. The Great Hall was used not only to display the glory and the power of the chapter, but it also was large enough for multiple companies to assemble. The Space Marines of the chapter would sometimes gather there in the presence of their ancestors before deploying into a mission or a campaign. Another very important chamber in the battle barge is the Apothecarion. In this pristine white chamber is where the apothecary safeguarded the chapter's genetic heritage and tended to the injured Space Marines. It is rare for a Space Marine to suffer lingering damage from combat. Most wounds are not strong enough to kill a battle brother, either healing quickly or being overcome by some auxiliary organ. By the time the Space Marine has returned to the battle barge, any such damage would have healed or had been patched up in the field by the apothecaries. The Apothecarion therefore usually dealt with only those Space Marines who required new organs or limbs or cycle surgery for extensive mental trauma. Far more important than the tending to of wounded battle brothers, the Apothecarion serves as the repository for the chapter's gene seed. Filled with ancient tomes and sacred scrolls is the battle barge's librarius. Every piece of text ever laid down by the chapter or relevant to its existence is housed within the chamber. Overseen by the librarians, it is a silent and holy place of only whispered secrets and hidden truths. Few battle brothers are permitted access to the librarius, its reserves of knowledge restricted to the chapter master and his advisors. And then there's the center shrine known as the Reclusium. The Reclusium is greatly revered as a sacred place for the chapter's battle brothers. It contains precious relics drawn from the chapter's history. It has fragments of armor from fallen champions of the chapter, blessed weaponry that has drunk from the blood of the heretic, the Xeno, and the demon, and captured banners and shattered icons of defeated foes. Space Marines come to the Reclusium to meditate or pray to the Primarch and the Emperor. Chaplains are charged with overseeing this sacred chamber of the battle barge. There are many other chambers that are often customized by the chapter to fit their unique culture and needs. Battle barge are as much prized relics as they are warships. They are icons of strength and endurance that echoes the might of the Space Marines. The resources required to build them anew are difficult to come by. The loss of even a single one of these vessels would not only be a great blow to the military capabilities of a chapter, but it would also damage its morale, robbing it of part of its proud warrior history.
And that's a deep dive on the creation of a Space Marine. Like I said, I didn't get into the biology of the creation, which is, in other words, the gene seed and all that kind of stuff. But maybe I'll save that for later in the month. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with your friends. And if you guys enjoy these types of lore videos, hit us up with a super thanks or support us on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk tomorrow. This was Gershwin with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
with my